Let me ask you something. Are you getting everything out of your rent-to-own business? If you're not an A-Pro member, then the answer is probably no. Look, advocacy is A-Pro's bread and butter. This is why they were created and what they do best. But here's the thing. A-Pro membership is about way more than advocacy. A-Pro connects you to the movers and the shakers of the industry, people who've been there, done that, and they can help you do it even better. A-Pro's monthly webinars give you expert insights and actionable takeaways. It's like having a masterclass for your business every single month. Got questions about complex regulations or sticky situations? No problem. A-Pro's legal hotline gives you direct access to experts who have got the answers. That's a peace of mind that you can't put a price on. And let's not forget the resources, news, updates, and tools that keep you ahead of the curve. Scholarships for your team? Check. Disaster relief when you need it most? Double check. A-Pro is your ultimate support system in the rent-to-own world. So stop settling for less. With A-Pro, members get more. More support, more connections, and more success. Head over to rtohq.org and join the A-Pro family today. Because in this business, more isn't just better. It's essential. See you at the top with A-Pro. Welcome to the RTO Show. I'm your host, Pete. Let's talk rent-to-own with Dan, companion today. Dan is going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the world of RTO from a look at the future from the past. How you doing today, Dan?
Great, Pete. How are you?
I am excellent. Today, I don't think you guys know, this is a plethora of information, a huge amount of experience and RTO education coming into this conversation. But Dan, before I say anything, why don't you cover a little bit of an introduction and tell us about your background in rent-to-own?
Sure. It started in my family. My father started in about 1983, 83 in the rent-to-own world. He was the largest Zenith retailer in New England and learned about rent-to-own and decided to give it a shot. And he actually went down to Florida, took a couple of courses from different individuals down there, that retailers that were getting into it, and said, boy, this looks like something interesting. So I literally from there grew up in it. I was about 14, 15 years old and really watched my dad in the evolution of the business. And I essentially went to college and really used rent to own as a mechanism of understanding financing and understanding access to the goods and services that a lot of America at the time did not have access to. From there, I actually went to work for a Zenith distributor, and within that, my dad had actually sold his company, and the company that bought them actually went into bankruptcy about 3 or 4 years later, and I ended up with this company, Vermont Hardware. We ended up buying back a lot of my dad's stores and starting Rental Express, which was my first ownership within the rent-own industry. It was quite a fast-paced change, really developing into this economic model called rent-to-own. And I became working with TRIB at the time. A lot of state laws were just coming up across the nation, literally. And I became the first association president for Vermont and worked with APRO, Rent-A-Center, with Ron DeMoss, Brad Dennison, Ron Waters, Bill Keese. We developed an association in Vermont and then worked a long time to get a law passed in the state of Vermont. It took probably 8 to 10 years. I believe I'm still the only association president ever in Vermont, truthfully.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So again, fast forward, I sell my company in 2004 to SEI Aaron's, moved to Florida, and actually joined Badcock Home Furnishings. And they wanted to see if they could develop into the rent-to-own model out of their retail stores. So from 2004 to 2009, I was part of a project to do that. And we tested it for about 4 years and came to the conclusion in all essence that Badcock's really was already, in a lot of ways, had that demographics, had that customer, just serving them in a different way than the traditional RTO model was. So there it was. I kind of went through this massive evolution in about 15 years, and it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about the industry, and we came up with new ideas. The retail market started to understand that they weren't getting a part of this customer base. So we started to see the development of companies that were joining with retail forces and offering rent to own as part of the finance option within their retail store.
So here's a question. You said that 1983, everything started off, and then you ended up in Florida. Why come to Florida to learn? I mean, I know why I think Florida is the Mecca right now, and I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean, we have a lot of entrepreneurial people who have kind of started in Florida, and a lot of businesses that I know of flourished in Florida. But why would you come? Like, Vermont is so far out. Why would you come from Vermont to Florida to kind of get your grasp on rent to own?
Well, I think at the time, Florida was always the go-to, obviously, because vacationing and the weather and the beaches. So, for people in the Northeast to say, hey, I can go down to Florida and get some good education, get some sun, and enjoy the attributes of Florida. I think that's why you see a lot of people visit Florida from the Northeast. And to your point, I believe rent to own, if you take some of the founders, the original individuals, especially buddies that had developed down there, they were right at the foundation of creating this model. And so, no doubt, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, too.
Well, Norman Slatton is a number one guy in our book. I wish he was still around. I've actually worked directly with and directly for Jamie Slatton, his son. I spent a few years working for the Buddies Corporation when they kind of underwent some changes and stuff, and love those guys. They do a great job. Slats was definitely a pioneer in the business and in the industry. So you're in it, because what I'm really kind of curious about is you kind of hit towards the end, right? You said you did it from like 2004 to 2009. Well, the housing crisis happened in 2007, 2009, somewhere in there. It was in there, late 2007, went to 2008, kind of sort of started slowing down in 2009. How did that affect rent to own, and did it affect Badcock's in a way that's why they didn't go for after that continuum? Or was it, like you said, that we kind of already have the same customers, there's no point in moving on?
Yeah, exactly. I think at the end of the day, when the crisis happened, and we were part of a new business development project. So we were part of the budget that was really research and development. And it wasn't, we're going to go into this full blown. I know he started out and the press releases came out, and some people, I say, shaking in their boots a little bit that, wow, you're going to have a major retailer who understands this customer come out there and start opening hundreds of stores. That really wasn't the idea. We were put in place to study the model, study the rent-to-own customer as it sat in Florida at the time with who they were doing business at, whether it was Rentway, Buddies, Rent-A-Center, Aaron's. We were there to look at all the models and which models seemed to be most effective in the different elements, meaning, which ones are making the most profit, which ones appease, the consumer of today. So to your point, and as you know, when the economics get worse, really the rent-to-own option becomes more valuable in the sense that it's always about access. If anything we learned, and we learned it way back in 1983 through 90, that why was this offering to the consumer so important? Because they did not have access to the goods and services that a normal higher FICO score customer would have. So, this and rent-own, they understand it to that level, obviously, but we got into it. We really got into the data and looked at that consumer and said, okay, what can we do? Or Badcock's already doing it with the offerings. And there it was, right? That's what we were studying. Does a retail finance transaction, the way they were doing it, equal out to a rent-to-own flexible, get out of the transaction type of option? Is the weekly payment versus the bi-weekly versus the semi-monthly, different the monthly behaviors? We looked at consumer behaviors, and we did learn a lot about that. And yes, when you have economic strife and difficulties, the rent-to-own option definitely becomes more valuable. The consumer now knows they have a place that they're not going to be judged just on a FICO score.
Definitely one of the reasons why I've been a rent-to-own has always been based on the fact that we provide a service to people who have needs. Regardless of how they get those needs met, rent-to-own has always been one of those stations where, good, bad, or indifferent, we're here. You don't have to have a great FICO score, but you can. You don't have to have a great income, but you can. And we can cater to either one, either way. And, now that we have especially considering back then. I mean, we have products now that you would see in high-end big box retailers, and you have items that I'm fixing a need, right? This is a need I have. I need a washer and dryer. I'm fixing that need, not necessarily the front loader set or the new LGs that have all the bells and whistles. We can do either or. Now, historically, I've always seen that, yes, I agree. Rent to own has always kind of flourished in the opposite side of what's going on with the market. Do you see any rough roads coming down the patch for rent to own?
I think I don't. I hate to say it. I think rent to own is going to thrive. And the reason why I say that, this is a different economy than we're used to seeing. The job market is not suffering. And in traditional type of economic turndown or a recession, you see there's job losses. And usually when you start seeing job losses at the blue collar level, then you start to see some issues, because now your customer, your demographic is being hit by job losses, which in turn, that affects their income. That is not what's going on right now. People can't find enough people. And that's the strange element here. So I think rent to own actually is going to be in really a unique position. I think still monitoring, how much you give somebody, that's always been a difficult challenge for the rent to own world. Because the traditional credit side sets a credit limit and they manage that payment based on the terms and conditions. So you have that control mechanism in that world. For rent to own, you're saying, okay, they got the washer and dryer. Now they got the bedroom set. Now they've got a television. And you look at that payment and you're how are you measuring it? How are you feeling like you're really being responsible to the customer? And yes, they absolutely have an option out, but I know that's not the mentality of the transaction. The transaction is to say, can I get you to ownership? If that's your desire. Don't get me wrong. It's like people who buy and lease cars. They do it every 3 years and they just want a new car. There's very well people out there that just want the latest, greatest of something. So there's nothing wrong with that. But my point to you is that you still have to be engaged at that level to understand your consumer and what they can afford to do.
So I did go over the last GDP review. I did see that we actually did do a lot of hiring in the last little bit, which was something that I thought kind of strange, because that leads me to the other part of what I wanted to talk to you about. Why do you think it's so hard to find good hires if there's that job market is increasing, it's getting up there? Then is that because the higher talent labor is already employed? Is that what the case is?
I think when I studied the model of what just happened through the pandemic, one thing has been abundantly clear is that the generation, from that, I'd say 55 and up, they exited the employment market massively. And I don't think people really understood how much they did exit the employment market. And I think there was massive amounts of voids to be filled, and that happened. So I think there just became this massive opening of jobs to which we just don't have enough people to fill those jobs. So certain industries have been paying the price. If you're not out there figuring out cool cultures, cool pay plans, things to bring people to the table, there's just a lot out there for the workforce, the younger workforce, to look at and say, boy, I can go here for $24 an hour, or I can do this for 24. And I'll tell you what will happen if your culture or your environment is not good in this day and age, they will be out of there in a week. If they don't feel comfortable, we've seen it in the industries I've worked with, they're out in 1 and 2 weeks just going, no, this isn't for me. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. So even the pay necessarily isn't keeping people, and I say the younger generation, involved in the company. And this idea, I guess, of economic forces saying, well, you got to pay your rent, you got to take care of your family. It's different. It's definitely different than what we've seen in the past. But I think the gap of the 55 to 75 group that was working and exited just caused a massive gap with services of hospitality, all these things that this group was taking care of for jobs. I think they left a massive gap that still isn't filled.
So then, in your opinion, you've been doing this a long time. What is the culture needed? And I'm going to say that, what is the culture needed to cultivate the people that we have openings for, that we can associate this particular type of person with this particular type of job cycle, this particular type of skill set in rent to own? How would I go about doing that? I'm going to tell you the truth. I think there's a lot of DMs and I think there's a lot of markets. I think there's a lot of companies out there who are fighting to find the right person to put in that spot. And, it's not that we're getting a shortage of people. I just think that, like you said, it's not the type of people who would normally be in rent to own. And so when they come in, it's a culture shock. It's not necessarily what they're looking for. I think rent to own is a unique type of person. How would we cultivate that? How, in your opinion, how do you think that we can make that happen?
I think it's the pathway of a career. I've seen it in another industry that I've worked with and consulted with in the world of technicians for the auto industry. And we see the same issue there, truthfully, is that someone wants to come in and they want to know they have a pathway to a career. They have a way of getting to wages that are not subject to just someone's opinion. They want something defined. And I use the world of technicians because they have the concept of flat rate. They do jobs, they get paid based on what the job pays. Now, of course, in the rent-to-own world, that it isn't that defined, obviously. You've got the performance of the store in the company, but you really got to say to a person, it's not just a job. We want you to move up in this way and give them a vision of what that's going to be, even in the aspect of some companies doing employee ownership types of mechanisms, if that can work. And that's been a tool now I've seen over the last decade of companies that get bigger, who the owner kind of wants to move out, but wants his employees to still really be part of the organization. So they provide this, equity tool. But that's what they need. You need to give this person you're hiring, here's a vision, here's how we get you there. And it has to be clear. And it has to have markers. And that's very difficult for independents, especially in retail where things are subject to so many different things. So if you can establish solid pay plans that are consistent, that you're not hiring this guy at $10 an hour, $14 an hour, but the next guy, because you need him, you hire him at 16, for instance. So guess what? You just pissed off 3 other people that got hired off at 14. They're like, well, what do you mean, man? I've been with you for 3 years. So these types of inconsistencies create this culture that we're talking about that just causes you angst. And you didn't plan to do it that way. It just happened. And you're trying to put out a fire and you're trying to take care of the need at hand. But this is when you start looking at how you lose employees and why you lose them, you'll see a lot of it has to do with that environment.
I totally agree with that. I think I've seen that firsthand more times than I care to shake a stick at. You're kind of hiring to fit that need, and it just happens to be that need comes in at a higher price. And unfortunately, the leveling around happens. Somebody knows that they were brought in at a certain percentage or certain price rate, and unfortunately you have to match that and you go back and forth. And I do think that a certain skill set requires a certain amount of compensation regardless of the situation, whether it's taught or whether it's innate, and then you kind of just build from there. And if you start at this position, this is the kind of pay you can expect in this position. If you move up, this is the kind of pay you can expect when you move up to this type of position. Almost like that open letter to everybody that this is what the salaries are going to be and this is what you can expect in these positions. And kind of I've seen that take foothold more in positions and jobs now, that a lot of people are like, this is the open mic, so to speak, and here it is. This is what you make for this position. This is what you make for this position. There's nothing hidden. There's no closed doors. There's no cloak and dagger. This is the way it is for everybody.
And then you build a culture of trust. You build a culture on performance. If there's performance indexes put in there, commission's the most interesting thing. Aaron's, one of the things that stood out with Aaron's back in the day, truthfully, was they commissioned their salespeople on the rent-own transaction and different types of mechanisms. But it made sense. They were very much a growth company where that was not a traditional way of paying people in rent-to-own back in the day. And I think commission is a great proposition. I think the problem in today's world, though, with commission is that person coming in doesn't want the fear of being paid or not getting paid if the economy goes to crap or a store manager is poor or suddenly I don't get inventory. So that's where you can lose a good person, truthfully, if you're not running a really good ship, because commission can go either way. It'd be spectacular, or you can lose some good people.
Absolutely. So, one of our talks, because we've talked before, and you had mentioned RTO online, and something that you thought kind of took off, but it didn't last. What do you think caused that? I mean, I think nowadays people want to know more about rent to own than ever. Was that something that you think might be interesting to RTO again?
Well, 100%. To the man's credit, Roy Griffon, who I this day respect, he saw, similar to probably what you saw, that there's a lot of employees, there's a lot of people in the industry. They want to learn more. They want to be able to grow in this industry, but there just didn't seem to be the kind of consistent information, or even at the time being able to put it online where it was convenient. And yeah, he really started to promote very similar, but in a magazine format, essentially. It was something that was actually working very well. It etched itself in many different ways. And it's too bad that, I know Roy had taken down pretty much everything that even exists to that, all that information back then. But absolutely, there's certainly an opportunity to provide an online format. And, and I know APRO's done a great job for how they have pulled together independent retailers from across the nation and then partnered us with the Rent-A-Centers of the world and Aaron's and corporate, corporate big entity, public company. That they did a great job, but there's still something missing out there. And I think you guys have probably tapped into it a little bit, that's very similar, that there's a yearning, but where is it? How do you make it work, right? How do you give people these skill sets and this information where it translates into something that companies want to use?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everyone, it's Pete Chow here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing, and let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRO and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together. They design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too. Well, we're definitely interested in getting the word out there about rent-to-own and it's all of its intricacies as best as we can. Of course, one of the things that I always like to do is make sure that we're have as much access to the information as possible. We're all as educated as we can be on this particular subject. And a lot of times there's some back end things that people just don't understand, like how APRO works, how your state rental dealers association works, and what's the reason behind them? What is TRIP for? What is Nationwide for? How are we fighting to get the best pricing and the best budgeting we can for the customers that we have available to us? And, and competing with those big box retailers who are ordering 10,000 units when we're only ordering 2 or 3, and how we can pull that together and make it work. I was actually talking to Mike Tissett, not that long ago, and, he said something that kind of really stood out to me, and it was the fact that rent-to-own is made up primarily of a lot of smaller dealers. And I guess I never really thought about that. So, of course, after that conversation and after that podcast aired, I'm Googling all these different places, and it's really nice to see it's not just, of course, you always have the big guys on the block, right? You have your Rent-A-Centers and your Aaron's and a lot of the people that, they go to that name and they know, okay, I know them. But there's also a lot of associations out there, a lot of younger dealers, a lot of hungry dealers that, may only have 5 to 13 stores, and they actually are doing it right. And they're taking care of their customers and they're representing their local area, And then I want to say during one of our talks, you said you were part of FRDA at one time. Is that correct?
I was on the board. When I joined Badcock, I was actually on the Florida Rental Dealers Association board for only about 4 or 5 years, I believe, and worked with Chris Kale and Terry Bevel, no, great group of guys. Again, a real deep understanding to the industry, and just like you said, and when I started with my dad, right, at the independent retailer in the electronics furniture marketplace was always part of the local economies in a big way, repairing televisions, taking care of that local customer. And rent to own in a weird dynamically way started to fill those gaps, differently, but still provided a local presence to a consumer that just you wanted to know your neighbor in a retail transaction, and rent to own has done that, and for a long time. And I think you look at the retailers now, because of the margins, they were forced out, and buying groups, as you just said, buying groups evolved into rent to own. I was a big player at the time trying to push the rent to own when, Trib did a great job, but to me, we were missing the facet of rent to own being a bigger player in that buying group of Nationwide. I was part of Kia Boston, and I understood that, boy, we needed to survive and buy at the levels we needed to. We needed to be part of that ecosystem. And to the credit of, Nationwide started to happen, Trib, there was a lot of things going on, to our point, and a lot of it I pushed, truthfully. I said, guys, we can't stay in this little bubble. You've got to stay competitive with your buying processes, your margins, because if someone gets aggressive out there, they'll put you out of business on the margin side. So, but there's so much service to rent to own that, thankfully, it's not like the traditional retailer like my dad that, all right, I'm selling a $199 TV that I bought at $189, and Walmart bought it for $100, and then they're going to sell 1,000 of them, and I'm going to sell 20. I think the rent to own service and all the things they do still provides a good economic model for the marketplace.
Absolutely. Now, I do have a side question for you, because you said Vermont, and you're in Vermont now, correct?
I currently live in Vermont, yes.
Okay. So not that long ago, I was talking to a good friend of the RTO show, Ben McCauley, who has a pawn and rental business. He's actually part of it, doesn't own it, but Ben McCauley is part of it, Castle Pawn and Rentals, and he's in Arkansas. But he did say that there was one other in the country, and I want to say it was in the very Northeast. Have you come across any pawn shops that do the rental and the pawn at the same time?
No, the Northeast is pretty strict. We don't have a lot of pawn in the Northeast, honestly. I don't know where down the borderline. Obviously, in Florida with Scott and there's a ton of them down there, obviously. But I can see where I can see the cross demographics, I guess. It definitely is a different transaction. So it would take a unique model and person to make that work. But I can see the cross demographics of it. I don't know how effective it is. Do you stretch out your revenues on one side versus the other, and how's that working? But if he's growing his business, offering that transaction, then good for him. I know down in Florida, you didn't see a lot of it, so you knew it had to be tough, because the Florida guys definitely would have jumped into it if they could.
I don't disagree. After hearing about it, I was definitely putting my mind to the pavement as far as what that would consist of and the logistics of that, getting that rolling. And talking about getting it rolling, what do you think about tires and rent to own? That's something new. I don't know if they had that around when you were doing it. That's a big staple in what we're doing right now. A lot of dealers have tires that they rent to own for whatever particular, whether it's the rims and tires or just the tires. You're mostly your traditional RTO guys are just going tires. And then, of course, you have the R&Rs that are doing like the tire and rims. Was that a big thing? I don't remember that being a big thing down in the 2000s. But what do you think about that?
So that was being tested quite aggressively in that time period. And Larry Sutton, again, I know Larry for a long time. Matter of fact, the first person I ever met in the RTO world, and it was a different association at the time. I met him in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Larry was with Champion, I believe, at the time. So I've known Larry a long time, and I give him amazing kudos with seeing the vision of this product line and this service being taken into the RTO world. Again, we're back to access, right? At the end of the day, right? Does this consumer need access to this product, and can you service that product? So Larry figured out that, yeah, I can again, independent service center, tires and wheels, finance option, rent to own, and he just knocked it out of the park. He took the kinks out of it for the traditional RTO guy. And I think, RTO, the one element that scares the traditional retailer versus the RTO person is collection. bar none, collections and the potential of repossession. I call it the magical fear line. And that's where Larry and his connections within this industry knows how to communicate with the customer when it comes to payment programs, where the traditional retailer just thinks everybody's going to steal from you. How on earth are you going to do it? They're going to rob you blind. And so there's definitely a psychological disconnect. And Larry understood that product line. He built a wonderful model to which many RTO guys have gotten into and have benefited from and have expanded it. So I was at the cusp of that, and a good model has now proven itself out, truthfully. People are being very successful with his model with other services. You know, they're doing alignments, they're doing oil changes, they're doing tire changeovers. And then, like I said, it's another part of the marketplace that is needed. So I think it was a perfect opportunity at the time, and Larry did a great job with some others. You know, I think there's a few others, Rim Time, and some of the, I think, Rent-A-Center got into it with Rim Time. Aaron's had their version of it. I don't know where those stand today, but I know Larry. I was in Reno, Nevada, in a convention not more than 2 weeks ago, and I actually drove by one of his R&R stores in Reno, Nevada. So I actually took a picture. I meant to send it to him. I haven't done that yet.
I tell you, he's probably going to enjoy that. He's doing a great job. Larry is an amazing person. He's an amazing leader. Kudos to him and his business model. So what took you all the way back to Vermont? You're knee deep in the rent-to-own scene for the early 2000s, and then you go back to Vermont. What caused that?
Family, mostly just family. And I'm from here. You know, I think anybody, you know, where you grow up in life, you're comfortable sometimes. And Vermont's, you know, again, the population of 660,000, you know, but it's a state that is just neighbor to neighbor. I mean, really, and I know there's plenty of places in the country like this, but we just do take care of each other in the state of Vermont. You know, and my parents are in Florida, my brother's in Florida. You know, I still have a lot of friends and family in Florida, so I go down there quite often, but at heart of hearts, you know, my kids were still up here, and that's why I'm here.
So if you had the ability to go back in time to a younger Dan, what would you say? What advice would you give to a younger Dan as far as RTO is concerned?
If anything that woke me up in the same as cash world was that here you are providing, in essence, a 0% finance option to someone if they can pay in 90 days or 120 days for a product that they're able to purchase outright. And I always felt that some shunned it, didn't understand it, and thought it caused more harm than good in a lot of essence. But my thing was the industry had the opportunity to expand a little bit quicker than I thought it did. And I mean this because now you see the rent-to-own option in major retailers across the country. So now that doesn't mean they do it as well as the local guy, but they're offering the transaction. So there, in essence, is what you've got to ask yourself. Are you fulfilling the needs to your consumer, and can you handle servicing those products? I was always the guy ahead of the curve a lot of ways because I came up through traditional retail and you pushed the limits and you wanted to see what you could do. So that's why Badcock was such a fascinating opportunity for me, because I was like, how do you take this mix, right? And I think at the end of the day, you really have to understand your business model, how you're going to get rid of used merchandise, how long it stays in the system. There's a lot of decision making that you don't think about. And I haven't walked into a rent-own store in a long time from an independent point of view. But are you merchandising properly? Are you marketing properly? That was always a big weakness too, marketing. You know, they just didn't seem to know how to get the message out to that consumer. So those are the things that stick in my head from my days.
So if you had any words of wisdom for the guys now, what would it be?
Just continue to listen to your customer. Know who your customer is. It's not everybody. And once you understand that, you know, you're not going to compete with the Walmarts, and don't try to. And that's been the age-old sage advice, even back in the day of independent retailers, was, look, How are you going to compete with Home Depot on washer dryer prices? How are you going to compete with Walmart on electronics prices? That's been going on now for 30 years. Once you understand who you are, what you can do for your consumer, and show that value, show it, market that value, that you have a relationship, that it means more than just products themselves, you'll go a long way. You'll go a long way.
Wise words from somebody who is highly educated in the rent-to-own system. Dan Companion, we definitely appreciate you coming out and reaching out to the RTO show. We always love to have people who have experience and know what's going on. A couple of insights as far as getting your employees to buy into your culture. We don't have a bleak outlook as far as Dan's concerned in our future and in our future model as far as the economy is concerned. And I have to agree, when it turns down a little bit, I think RTO turns up. Some forward-looking advice, guys. Just do the right thing by your customers and realize that those are particular RT customers that we are reaching out to. And those RTO customers are our bread and butter. We're not competing with everybody else. We're competing with ourselves. Let's do the right thing and treat the customer the right way.
You want to give, you mentioned Michael Pissett, and it's funny because this goes way back with my dad and his dad, actually, Daryl. There's a man, I can't even say enough about him and his spirit, very much similar to my dad's, just a great individual. And I don't remember Mike so much, but I definitely remember his dad when he was president of APRO. And I remember hugging him, handshaking, and saying, "Oh, this is awesome." And I'm glad Mike continued. There's something, I guess, if I would have had to do it over again, I wish the timing would have been right for me to take over my dad's opportunity, but it just wasn't.
There's absolutely no family like the RTO family except the ones that have our blood. And we really appreciate everybody who comes through this business because one way or another, they help shine a little light on something. They always leave one of those gems and those things that we can always take with us into the future with RTO. To be honest with you, I've always looked up to Mike in those regards. He has always led me in the right direction. Whether I tell him enough or not, I do kind of look at his leadership and the way and the direction he kind of does things. And I have a couple of other people that I really appreciate, but Mike's always been close to the top of that list for sure. So thank you so much, Dan, for being on the show and just giving us some of that guidance and some of that experience.
I think the future's bright and what you're doing, congratulations to you guys. It's what makes an industry work, truthfully. You gotta have people that are a voice and leaders in the industry to make an industry successful. So kudos to you guys for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate your time and looking forward to hopefully seeing you around town.
That sounds good. All right, man.
All right, Dan. Have a great day.
Yeah, bye-bye.
That's it for our show today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Listen, we want you guys to follow us on social media. Make sure that you check us out on Facebook and Instagram. You can look in both of those and find us at The RTO Show or at The RTO Show. We love to hear from you guys. Also, if you want to contact me directly, please do. My email is pete@thertoshowpodcast.com. You can also visit us online at www.thertoshowpodcast.com. When you get on there, take a look around. Feel free to buy some swag. And just to let you guys know, this is a heads up. We are close to the end of Season 3. So why don't you just check out the website, or you can listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you can listen to the entire season, download that, and you can even go back and see Season 1 and 2. Make sure to check out our sponsors, APRO, Vox Pop Uli, and Dialectic, and let you guys know we do appreciate everything. So we're going to end it like we always do. Make sure your collections are low to get your sales high. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you in the next one.